From the wilderness of Kodiak Island, Alaska, this is Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier with your host, Robin Barefield. In a land full of peril and vicious animals, humans are the most dangerous predators of all.
With landmarks bearing the names Deadmen Valley, Headless Creek, Funeral Range, and Hell's Gate Rapids, you might think twice before planning a trip to Nahanni National Park in Canada. However, the legends behind these names make the park even more daunting. Welcome to Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier. I'm your host, Robin Barefield, and I'm broadcasting to you from the heart of the Kodiak National Wildlife Refuge on Kodiak Island in Alaska. Nahanni National Park Reserve in the Deco region of the Northwest Territories of Canada encompasses 11,000 square miles of some of the planet's roughest, most breathtaking scenery. In 1978, the park became a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It includes part of the Mackenzie Mountain Range, and the South Nahanni River flows through its center. In addition to its steep, jagged mountains, the Nahanni National Park boasts geysers, hot springs, deep canyons, caves, virgin forests, and waterfalls, including Virginia Falls, a 315-foot waterfall twice as high as Niagara Falls. Unfortunately, something evil lurks in the depths of this beauty. Due to the geothermal activity in the area, fog often permeates the valley, creating a spooky atmosphere. And hikers report shrieks, screams, and murmurs when the wind blows through the many canyons. The Dean people, who have inhabited this valley for 10,000 years, consider much of the Nahanni National Park sacred, and many places are closed to the general public, making the park even more mysterious. Rumors about tropical gardens and mythical creatures abound. The local Dean people believe a malevolent spirit haunts the valley and invades the area like fog. According to legend, a tribe called the Naha once inhabited the Nahanni Valley. Naha warriors often descended from their mountain homes to raid and pillage Dean settlements. Finally, the Dean braves decided to seek revenge, but when they reached the Naha encampment, they found it vacated. The Naha had vanished, and no one has seen them since. Are they really gone, or just hiding in the many caves in the area? In the early 1800s, Northwest Company fur traders established Fort Laird and Fort of the Forks, later named Fort Simpson. The two forks were situated on the Laird River, upriver and downriver from the mouth of the South Nahanni. Dean traders who came to the forts told other traders and frontiersmen about the horrors of the Nahanni. In the summer of 1897, prospectors struck gold in the Klondike, and the stampede to the goldfields began. There were several routes to the Klondike goldfields, but none were easy. One particularly grueling path was the all-Canadian Overland Route, which began in Edmonton, Alberta. A few stampeders elected to shorten this trail by following the South Nahanni River. At least 2 men successfully navigated this route, but many others disappeared in the foggy realms of the Nahanni Valley. After the Klondike gold rush ended, prospectors began looking elsewhere for gold, and a few wandered into the Nahanni Valley to pan the many creeks feeding into the South Nahanni and Flat rivers. Some men who survived this venture told of a valley paradise hidden in the Mackenzie Mountains. They claim this valley remained snow-free all winter, and due to the hundreds of bubbling hot springs in the region, it had a warm climate with tropical plants. Because of the hot springs, the area was often cloaked in fog, but the soil was black and fertile and supported lush vegetation. This vegetation drew in wild animals, and one prospector said he saw moose, caribou, and sheep that were so fat they were nearly square. These prospectors and Dean traders also claimed they saw the fresh tracks of mammoths, mastodons, and other prehistoric animals. Despite the frightening tales about evil spirits, the lure of finding gold in the Nahanni region drew prospectors to the area, and many either vanished or were brutally murdered. Willie and Frank McLeod grew up in and around Fort Laird. They were competent outdoorsmen and familiar with the wilderness in the Mackenzie Mountains. In 1900, their brother Fred McLeod took the job as chief factor at Fort Laird. One day, a Nahanni Indian brave walked into the fort. This was unusual since the Nahanni people usually kept to themselves. They were a mysterious nomadic tribe who subsisted in the Mackenzie Mountains and rarely came to the fort. The brave chose several items he wished to purchase, and then, to Fred's surprise, he withdrew a handful of solid gold nuggets to pay for the items. When Fred asked the young man where he'd found the gold, he reluctantly told him he'd found it somewhere in the Nahanni Valley, south of the confluence of the Flat and Nahanni rivers. 3 years later, another Nahanni brave came to the fort and again paid for his goods with gold nuggets. He told Fred he'd panned his gold on Bennett Creek, a stream that empties into the Flat River. Fred knew he could not leave his job at the fort to search for gold, but he sent a message to his older brother Willie in Edmonton, telling him that a wealth of gold lay hidden somewhere in the Nahanni Valley. Willie quickly convinced his brother Frank to join him on a prospecting expedition. Willie and Frank McLeod headed up the Laird River and into the Nahanni Valley, where they panned a small amount of gold from various creek beds. They squandered most of it, but saved some of the larger nuggets to make a watch chain for their brother Fred. Willie and Frank felt a gold bonanza was waiting to be found in the Nahanni Valley. In January, the two brothers and their younger brother Charlie returned to the Nahanni to find their fortune. This time the brothers panned a larger quantity of gold. After a season of back-breaking work, the three brothers stuffed their gold nuggets into containers and decided to head to Fort Laird to restock their dwindling supplies before returning to the Nahanni the following spring. They constructed a boat from wood salvaged from sluice boxes, packed it with their supplies and gold, and headed down the Flat River. The poorly named Flat River contains a series of treacherous rapids, and the brothers successfully navigated several of these before finally capsizing their boat. They survived, but they lost their supplies and their gold. Willie and Frank took jobs for the Hudson's Bay Company at Fort Simpson to earn enough money to replace their lost supplies so they could return to the Nahanni. Despite the hard work and danger, gold fever had taken hold of them. Meanwhile, their brother Fred had transferred to Fort Providence, and one day a Scottish steamboat engineer named Robert Weir arrived at the fort with a boatload of supplies for the Hudson's Bay Company post. When Weir noticed the gold nugget chain on Fred's pocket watch, he asked about it. Fred told him his brothers had made it for him from Nahanni gold and said they were about to leave on another prospecting expedition in the rugged valley. Weir immediately traveled to Fort Simpson and offered to finance their next expedition as long as he could join them. Willie and Frank agreed, and the three men headed into the Nahanni Valley in the spring of 1905. Charlie decided not to accompany them on this trip. When Willie and Frank did not return to Fort Laird the following winter, their family was not concerned. They knew both men were comfortable in the wilderness and capable of surviving in subarctic conditions. They were hunters and trappers and could easily subsist. By the spring of 1907, the McLeod brothers still had not returned from their prospecting venture. Then someone found an abandoned canoe bobbing in a driftwood pile on the South Nahanni River, and it was similar to the one the McLeods and Weir had taken with them when they left for the Nahanni Valley. When Fred McLeod heard about the abandoned canoe, he informed his family. Charlie McLeod assembled a search party and headed into the South Nahanni in May 1908 to look for his brothers. After navigating the dangerous Cache Rapids, the party entered a bowl-like section of the valley. They scoured the shoreline for some time before one of them noticed a small clearing in the trees. The group pulled their boat up to shore to investigate. As soon as they stepped ashore, Charlie noticed a dog sled runner in the grass. On its side, one of his brothers had written, "We have found a fine prospect." They found no other signs of Willie and Frank, so the search party continued upriver. When they saw another man-made clearing, they headed for it to take a closer look. What they found surpassed their wildest fears. At a long abandoned campsite, on either side of a dead campfire and beneath two rotting blankets, they discovered a pair of human adult male skeletons. Both bodies were headless, and the heads were nowhere to be found. One body lay on its back, rolled neatly in its blanket, and the other was sprawled on its chest, with one arm reaching towards a rusted rifle leaning against a spruce tree. The search party guessed the two men had been ambushed while they slept. The first man had been killed in his sleep, and the second man had tried in vain to reach his rifle before he, too, was murdered. Charlie identified the dead men as his brothers from bits of their clothing, Willie's gold ring, and Frank's gold pocket watch, which dangled from a tree branch. They found no sign of Robert Weir, the man who had accompanied the McLeod brothers on their prospecting expedition. The party searched the area around the campsite for any clues to explain the brothers' deaths. They found crates of supplies and a box containing rich samples of gold-bearing quartz. Willie and Frank must have discovered a vein of gold somewhere in the Nahanni Valley. What happened to Robert Weir? A band of Slavi Indians found a skeleton in the woods about 3 miles from where the McLeod brothers had died. The authorities determined the dead man was Robert Weir, but others, including the McLeod family, were not so sure. Some people reported seeing Weir in Telegraph Creek, British Columbia, with an enormous quantity of raw gold. Others said he was living like a king in Vancouver. None of these claims were ever verified. Let me take a short break. Much of my latest novel, The Ultimate Hunt, is set at a remote hunting camp on a small island north of Kodiak. Shuyak Island is wild, beautiful, and the perfect setting for a wilderness mystery novel. Shuyak measures 12 miles long and 11 miles wide, but it contains more miles of sheltered waterways than anywhere else on the Kodiak archipelago. The island provides critical habitat to many species of nesting birds, harbor seals, sea otters, sea lions, and other marine life. Shuyak's interior region contains hundreds of small lakes and beaver ponds. The island is a haven for salmon and dolly varden and is home to Kodiak brown bears and Sitka black-tailed deer. Shuyak is a gorgeous place to relax and fish for salmon in August. But in The Ultimate Hunt, in November, it is a terrifying prison with no escape where death follows you every day. Are you up for a trip to the middle of the Kodiak wilderness? Check out The Ultimate Hunt, available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online booksellers. While the fate of the McLeod brothers scared many prospectors away from the Nahanni Valley, others could not resist the lure of the missing McLeod mine, and they set out into what was now called the Valley of Headless Men to find the riches the McLeod brothers had discovered. One of these prospectors was a Norwegian man named Martin Jorgensen. Jorgensen was an accomplished woodsman with an outgoing, friendly personality. He laughed at the idea that the Nahanni Valley was cursed. The details surrounding Jorgensen's venture into the Nahanni Valley are murky, but he headed alone into the valley in 1909 or 1910 in search of the McLeod brothers' lost gold. In 1913, a trapper arrived at the trading post at Pelly Lakes, Yukon, with a letter for Jorgensen's good friend. The letter consisted of a crude map marking a cabin about a mile upriver from the mouth of the Flat River. A short message told Jorgensen's friend to come quickly because he had struck it rich. Unfortunately, Jorgensen's friend was in prison when the letter arrived at Pelly Lakes, but he instructed another friend, Poole Field, to go to Jorgensen's cabin and stake a claim on his behalf. Poole headed into the Nahanni Valley, but did not find Jorgensen. He tried again the following year, and finally, on a creek near the mouth of the Flat River, he and his fellow searchers found what had been Jorgensen's cabin. They immediately knew something was wrong. The cabin had been burned to the ground, and nearby, they discovered Martin Jorgensen's headless corpse. His head was never found. The McLeod brothers and Martin Jorgensen were not the only people who met a brutal end in the Nahanni Valley. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police confirmed reports of dozens of similar deaths of prospectors in the valley, and many who entered the valley disappeared without a trace. One of the strangest incidents occurred in the winter of 1922, when the body of a World War I veteran named John O'Brien was found on a mountainside near Deadmen Valley. He was hunched over a pile of wood with a matchbook in his hand, looking as if he'd frozen to death while trying to light his campfire. Ominous happenings did not only occur on the ground. Numerous plane crashes into the mountains in the area earned the peaks the name Funeral Range. A dark legend suggests a curse hangs over the Nahanni Valley and its gold. The curse is sometimes attributed to a supernatural entity or a spell placed on the valley long ago by a Naha medicine man. According to Dean legend, the Nahanni Valley is a haunted place, home to ghosts and spirits. These restless spirits include the souls of those who have died here, as well as supernatural entities. Some of these spirits are benevolent, but many maliciously guard the valley and its treasures. The spirit the Dean feared most was an evil entity associated with the caves overlooking the South Nahanni River. This demon could make men vanish like smoke in the wind. On windy nights, those brave enough to camp in the valley can hear it wailing in the canyons. Prospector Frank Henderson said, "There is absolutely no denying the sinister atmosphere of the whole valley. The weird, continual wailing of the wind is something I won't forget soon." Some people have attributed the many murders to the Nahanni Indians wanting to keep trespassers out of their valley. But there is no evidence to support this theory. Due to the introduction of white men's diseases, the reclusive Nahanni people were wiped out early in the 20th century, making them unlikely culprits for the murders. Albert Johnson, known as the Mad Trapper of Rat River, is a plausible murder suspect. Johnson was a strange hermit who lived in a crude log cabin about 40 miles from the Nahanni Valley. In December 1931, another trapper complained about Johnson to the authorities. He said Johnson was tripping his traps and hanging them on trees. Constable Alfred King and Special Constable Joe Bernard obtained a warrant and approached Johnson's cabin. Johnson shot and wounded King and managed to escape, but he was eventually cornered and killed in a shootout. The officers found several gold teeth among Johnson's many possessions, and some wondered if the teeth were from the mouths of the prospectors murdered in the Headless Valley. Albert Johnson might have been responsible for some of the murders in the Nahanni Valley, but the episodes did not stop after his death. In 1945, miners discovered the headless body of their companion in his sleeping bag, and in 1962, an airplane pilot survived a crash in the valley and set up a camp near his downed plane. He had plenty of provisions and believed he would survive until rescuers arrived. He kept a journal of his ordeal and noted the many times he watched search planes fly overhead without spotting him or his airplane. He wrote in his diary for 50 days, and then the entries abruptly stopped. 6 months later, someone discovered his plane by chance, but the pilot was not at his camp, and no trace of him has ever been found. In the 1960s, geologists, naturalists, and other scientists began to study the Nahanni region, and many of these scholars returned to civilization with wild stories not easily explained by science. These researchers claimed they saw an enormous, solitary, wolf-like creature some believed was an amphison, an ancient carnivore called a bear dog. This species supposedly went extinct 8 million years ago. Others thought the animal more closely resembled a dire wolf, a prehistoric relative of a timber wolf. The creature also fits the description of a monster from Inuit myths called the Wahila. Was this Wahila roaming the valley, killing humans? Not all mysteries of the Nahanni Valley are relegated to the distant past. On June 12, 2005, lifelong friends David Horsey and Frederick Hardesty from Fort Simpson, Northwest Territories, Canada, went on a hunting trip and stayed at their friend Rod Gunderson's cabin, 77 miles northwest of Fort Simpson, in the Nahanni National Park. Gunderson said he saw both men when they arrived at the cabin, but they were missing when he returned 4 days later. The cabin was locked, and the men's rifles and gear were inside, but Gunderson could not find Horsey and Hardesty. Gunderson alerted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who began searching for the missing men on June 18th. However, to the family's dismay, they continued the search on June 23rd. Family and friends continued searching for the pair. On June 27, 2005, searchers found David Horsey's body in thick brush 2.3 miles from the cabin. Strangely, he had burns on his hands and arms. The area where he was discovered had been searched several times before, but since his body was found in heavy vegetation, the searchers possibly missed seeing his body. On July 8, 2005, a search team found the body of Fred Hardesty floating in the North Nahanni River, approximately 12.5 miles from the cabin. The coroner determined that Horsey had died of hypothermia and Hardesty had drowned. Since the deaths appeared to be accidents, the RCMP closed the case. However, the families felt the RCMP did not adequately investigate the deaths, and they said the scene at the cabin was very strange. According to David Horsey's stepbrother Joe, there were bullet holes all over the place, and there was a gunshot in the floor. The picture is bigger than just two guys, one who died of hypothermia and the other who died of drowning. There was something else that happened before all that came down. What happened at that isolated cabin that caused Horsey and Hardesty to flee without their weapons? We will likely never know. It is one more mystery of the Nahanni. Lush vegetation grows near the hot springs in the valley, but a tropical paradise has never been found. Many tales told by those who survived a visit to the Nahanni seem far-fetched, but no one can dispute the headless men or the strange disappearances. The Nahanni remains sacred but mysterious to the indigenous people who live near the valley. It is a place both revered and feared. Most of all, though, the Nahanni Valley demands the respect of those who tread there. Thank you for listening, and a special thank you to my patrons in the Last Frontier Club for supporting this podcast. If you would like to join the Last Frontier Club and unlock more episodes of Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier, search for the Last Frontier Club on Patreon or follow the link in the show notes. For more information about me and my books, check out the show notes on my website at murderandmystery.show. I'll be back soon with another edition of Murder and Mystery in the Last Frontier.
Dinner time. It's more than just a meal. It's when work comes to a halt, where macaroni masterpieces are made and little moments turn into lasting memories. With the Blue Cash Preferred Card, you can get 6% cash back at U.S. supermarkets. So you can bring home the flavors that bring everyone together. We did say everyone. Make the special moments even more rewarding. Learn more at americanexpress.com/explore-bcp. Terms and cashback cap apply with Blue Cash Preferred.